So since Tuor and Idril left, Eärendil becomes chief of the people living on the seaside, and he marries Elwing, and they have twins, Elrond and Elros. However, Eärendil has a great longing for the sea, both to look for his parents and to find Valinor and ask the Valar for help. He's become good buddies with Círdan, so Círdan helps him build a great ship called Vingilot, the Foam Flower. Eärendil starts going on his voyaging adventures, but he doesn't find Valinor or his parents, so he turns to head back home. Meanwhile, however, Maethros hears that Elwing has the Silmaril and is living by the ocean, and at first he doesn't want to do anything because he feels pretty awful about what happened in Doriath, but he and his brothers all feel more guilty about not fulfilling their oath, so they send messages to the Havens being like, hey, we want to be friends, but cough up the Silmaril, please. But the Haven Elves are like, nope. So the last 4 sons of Fëanor show up, and once again, elf battles elf. Círdan and Gil-galad show up way too late, so most of the elves are killed, Elrond and Elros are captured, and Elwing throws herself into the ocean while wearing the Silmaril. Amrod and Amras are killed, so only Maethros and Maglor are left, and they got literally nothing out of it. Ulmo rescues Elwing, however, giving her the likeness of a great white bird, and she flies across the ocean with the Silmaril on her breast, looking for Eärendil. When she finds him, she falls from the sky into his ship, having fainted, and Eärendil takes her in for the night, but in the morning he's like, oh my gosh, that's actually my wife. She tells him what happened, and they're both scared that their sons are going to be killed, but that was not the case, because Maglor took pity on them and raised them himself, and they came to genuinely care for each other. Eärendil doesn't know that, however, and he thinks that all hope is lost in Middle-earth, so he decides he has to try again and find Valinor. He binds the Silmaril on his brow and sails west, and it was rumored that the jewel was the only reason they ever made it there at all. Upon arrival at Amon, Eärendil sets foot upon the shore, and he says to Elwing and the 3 other dudes who are part of his crew that they should stay behind on the ship so that they don't risk the wrath of the Valar. But Elwing is like, nope, and she swims after him to the shore, so Eärendil is like, fine, but this is as far as you go. He comes to the elven city of Tirion, but finds it empty because the Valar were having yet another of their world-famous parties, and everyone was gone, except for a few watchmen, who see the light of the Silmaril in the distance and run to Valinor to report. Eärendil is scared that something awful has happened, and he's about to give up hope for good and go back to the ocean, but then Eönwë, Manwë's herald, calls to him and brings him before the Valar. Eärendil then begs for mercy for the Noldor and for men, asking that the Valar relieve their sorrows, and the Valar agree. Eärendil then goes in search of Elwing, and the Valar discuss his fate. Mandos is like, can we really allow a mortal man to come here and live? But Ulmo is like, well, are we counting him as a man like his father, or an elf like his mother? And Mandos is like, his mom was a Noldo, and they're not allowed here either, so your argument is invalid. And finally, Manwë is like, shut up, I'm in charge here, and I say that since Eärendil came here out of love for elves and men, he gets to decide how he will be judged. And I give that choice to Elwing and their sons as well. Speaking of Elwing, she started to get bored waiting for Eärendil and began wandering along the seaside until she found her way into Alcalonde, the city of the Teleri. She starts chatting up with them, telling them all about what happened in Beleriand, and it's there that Eärendil finds her. But it's not long before Manwë calls them back and tells them what was decided. Eärendil tells Elwing, you choose, because I don't care anymore, and Elwing picks the fate of elves because of Luthien. Eärendil chooses the same, even though he secretly favored men more because of his father. Then the Valar send those 3 dudes who run the ship with Eärendil speeding back to Middle-earth to bring tidings to the remaining people, and they take Vingilot and bless it, lifting it up into the heavens so that Eärendil can sail through the sky with the Silmaril still on his brow. Elwing doesn't go on these trips with him since she prefers being on Earth, but she gets a tower on the seashore where she waits for Eärendil to return. She then makes friends with the seabirds, and they taught her how to fly, so every time Eärendil returned in the sunset, she would fly to him on silver and white wings. Back at Middle-earth, people see a new star rising, which they call Gil Estel, the Star of High Hope. Maethros sees it and he says to Maglor, yo, that is totally a Silmaril. And Maglor is like, good, let's be glad it's where no one can try to take it. The elves are then all filled with hope, but Morgoth is a little concerned. Not really though, because at this point he's become so arrogant that he really doesn't think anyone can challenge him, and he doesn't even consider that the Valar will come to do anything about him. But they are, and so the Vanyar and the remaining Noldor prepare to march to war along with the Maiar. The Teleri aren't too keen on going to fight for the Noldor after that whole kinslaying business, but Elwing convinces them to help out, so they agree to build ships for the armies to sail on, but they never actually set foot in Middle-earth. The host of the Valar then comes blazing over the ocean, and so begins the War of Wrath. Morgoth pulls out all the stops in defense, but it really doesn't help him at all because nearly all of the bulwarks are destroyed, except for a few that buried themselves deep in the earth. The orcs get pretty much annihilated, and very few of them are left after that. Morgoth then starts to really freak out, so as a last resort he lets out his horde of winged dragons, and for the first time in the battle he starts to get the upper hand. It doesn't last long though, because Earendil shows up with an army of eagles and other great birds, and an epic battle ensues that lasts for a whole day. But at last Earendil kills Ancalagon the Black, the largest dragon, who falls into the mountains of Thangorodrim and breaks them. The sun rises, and at last the armies of the Valar prevail, going down to the deep of the earth to pursue Morgoth, who runs and hides like a little pansy and tries to plead for mercy, but they're just like, haha, yeah, nice try, sucker, and they chain him up and haul him away for actually forever this time. The might of Angband was at last destroyed, but it came at bitter cost, as the shape of the world had changed. Eowyn then summons all the elves of Beleriand to go back across the sea, but Maethros and Maglor refuse, and although they were pretty well sick of that dumb oath, they didn't give it up, and demanded the Silmarils from Eowyn. But he's like, no, and after all this, and the attacks on your own people, you don't have a right to the jewels anymore. They're gonna go back to the west where they belong, and you two have to come face judgment. Maglor wants to agree and submit because he's just so sad, and he says, hey, maybe the Valar will forgive us. But Maethros is like, if they don't, then we're still bound by our oath, and then we'd have no way to even fulfill it. But Maglor is still like, I mean, if Manwë and Varda say the oath is void, then isn't it void? And Maethros is like, nope, because we swore to Iluvatar himself, and he's not going to personally release us, so we're screwed. And Maglor is like, we're screwed whether we fulfill the oath or break it, but it wouldn't be as bad for everyone if we broke it. In the end, though, Maglor gives up and agrees with Maethros, and they sneak into Eowyn's camp at night, kill the guards, and swipe the Silmarils. Then the whole camp is ready to destroy them, but Eowyn is like, just forget it, and the last two sons of Fëanor run off into the wilderness, each one taking a Silmaril. But the Silmarils burn their hands with great pain, and Maethros then realizes that Eowyn was right, and his right was void, and the oath was in vain. Falling into despair, he threw himself into a chasm of fire, and his Silmaril went into the depths of the earth. Maglor was similarly pained, so he at last threw his jewel into the ocean, and spent the rest of his life wandering along the shore, singing in pain and regret, and never again seen by another elf. So at last the Silmarils spent the rest of time in the earth, the sea, and the sky. Afterwards, almost all of the Noldor and the Sindar returned to the west and lived upon Tol Eressëa, the island just off the coast of Valinor. The Noldor were pardoned by Manwë, and the Teleri forgave them for the kinslaying, at long last bringing an end to the curse of Mandos. But not all of the elves came back, and some, like Círdan, Celeborn, and Galadriel, stayed in Middle-earth. Gil-galad also stayed as the High King, and Elrond joined him, having chosen the fate of the elves, while his brother Elros chose the fate of men. Meanwhile, Morgoth is locked up inside the Void, with an everlasting guard and Eärendil perpetually patrolling. He could never be free again, but the lies and terror he wrought to Middle-earth could never be fully healed. Here ends the Silmarillion. If it has passed from the high and the beautiful to darkness and ruin, that was of old the fate of Arda Mard. And if any change shall come and the marring be amended, Manwë and Varda may know, but they have not revealed it, and it is not declared in the dooms of Mandos.